say one more thing about the weapons. They had another setting that I know about, the iodine setting. And if they hit you with the iodine setting, especially in the thyroid area, it would affect the iodine in your blood, and it would alter the chemistry of the blood so that your blood would seep through the arteries, and you'd bleed to death in like 2 minutes. Now, nothing I did was ever classified. Nobody ever gave me a briefing before I went out there. Nobody ever gave me a briefing when I came back. My orders said that nothing I did was ever classified. I was never part of a project. We were never building like airplanes or missiles, so therefore I was never shown any classified drawings or anything like that. Everything I know I had to figure out for myself. There's a good reason for that. The aliens don't handle anger the way humans do. When they become angry, you know, they either go away or they kill you, or, you know, humans, you know, we get angry with each other and we fight and we become good friends. The aliens, at least where humans are concerned, or at least my experiences, aren't like that. They're either pleasant or you're in trouble. If I didn't bring anything off the ranges, I didn't bring any photographs, any documents, any material. I came off only with my memories. There was nothing to debrief me on. The alien mothers, remember, are very proud of their ability to raise their children. If anything I did was classified, that would mean, for example, that after the teacher brought her daughter and her daughter's playmates around to simply play, then I would have had to have been called in and be debriefed by CIA guards. That would have upset the teacher beyond limit. To have 2 ordinary human guards call me in and start asking questions. How does the teacher take care of her children? Do you think she's doing a good job? I mean, you wouldn't have had to tell her. The next time I went out there using their communication equipment, she would have just said, she would have just figured it right out. Or the next time the generals showed up, she'd have just figured it right out. Well, remember the experience of that CIA guard on the steps of that he related to me on the steps of the Capitol building. The idea of upsetting the teacher, I mean, she was perfectly willing to just jerk the weapon and say, who's giving the orders? I thought we had an agreement, you know. The committee had agreed, which included the teacher, Range 4 Harry, some of the other tall whites, as well as the American generals. They had agreed that nothing I did would ever be classified, and the tall whites expect their agreements to be carried out, just like Philadelphia lawyers, to the letter. They go through a lot of trouble. They are very conscious of their agreements, and they keep them to the letter, and they expect the same from humans. 40 years isn't much time for the tall whites, since they live so much longer than we do. If anything I did was classified, they agreed that nothing I did would ever be classified. They meant that, period, you know, and they meant the American generals to keep that period, you know. And after all, I don't have any drawings or pictures. I didn't, you know, the log books that were out there, I left out there. And so there were, you know, usually classification refers to material things, you know, drawings, material, whatever. When I was out there, I never observed the aliens to do anything magical. They were very good at building craft that traveled faster than the speed of light. They did not travel in time. I never observed them traveling to another dimension. I never saw, I mean, they're not angels, they're just creatures like us. That I'm very religious, I'm Roman Catholic, that angels are angels and aliens are aliens. They did not come to teach me anything. They came for their purposes. They didn't, currently it seems to me that American physics is kind of in the reverse Galileo position. In the time of Galileo, religious leaders required that scientists think inside the box, and Scientists like Galileo wanted to experiment and think outside the box. Now, however, the situation appears to be reversed. American physicists seem to think that Einstein was always and forever perfect and complete, and so American scientists keep thinking inside the box. In Hall photon theory, my belief is that inside the photon there is a third field, but currently the box says there's only two fields. Most scientists won't consider it. They're insisting on thinking inside the box for religious reasons, pretending it's science, you see. As I describe in the appendix of Book 3, I show in a scientific manner how scientists should be approaching that. Currently, it's the religious leaders who are willing to consider guys like Monsignor Balducci, I believe, and so on, who are willing to think outside the box and say, of course, there can be intelligent life on other planets. One of the biggest shocks that I had to overcome in 1965 and 66 was once I realized that they were real, they were here, and that Einstein was wrong, and that God created life on many, similar to us, on a whole bunch of different planets. It was the shock of realizing that so many people had been so wrong for so long, you know? I mean, once you saw their craft come in defeated, floating on the gravity field in perfect silence and landing, it was the shock of saying, how could so many American scientists not have discovered that, or not even be trying to discover it, not even be thinking about that? And likewise, from a religious point of view, it seems, the teacher herself, one time on a different night when I went over there and I was talking to her, and she was willing to answer a few questions, she was teasing me because they have a dry sense of humor, and they liked to outthink me, and they could do so very quickly or very easily. And she said, and I was saying, she was making a long story short. She was pointing up to the stars in the sky, and she said, "You can see all the stars in the sky. Surely you didn't think you were alone." And at the time I had, you know, and then they were all laughing, you know, surely you didn't think that whatever life was on the earth wouldn't be repeated on the other stars, you know, and I had, and then they were all laughing, boy, is he silly, you know. And it just seems so obvious to me when you go out at night and you look up at the stars of the sky, that however whatever God did to make life here on earth, he must have done it again, because there are so many stars in the universe and it's so vast. And religious leaders are willing to think outside the box. Whereas now when I go and I talk to the scientists and stuff, they all start with this box called Einstein. Einstein himself never claimed to be perfect and complete, but all of his followers seem to claim that he was perfect and complete. And I think that's one of my observations is that box they're in. Well, remember when the teacher said that on other planets the intelligent beings typically killed off the animals, she was referring to other planets they'd seen with intelligent life on them, but she didn't elaborate. And the reason is because when they came for their purposes. They didn't come to say, let me tell Charlie everything there is to know about the universe. They didn't care. If they didn't have anything to say, some nights they might just come and not say anything. The kids might play and they might leave, you know, especially the men. If there was no reason for them to actually come and talk when they were close, like that night when there were the 3 electrical engineers there. They wanted to see me start up the electrical generator because that's the same kind of power source the U.S. Air Force had given them for use up on their hangar, because it was built by the Air Force. And they wanted to see how I used it as part of their training program, see? Well, from their point of view, there's no reason to talk to me about it. They just want to see me do it. So they came and just stood there and watched. And then, you know, eventually Charlie's bright enough to figure out that I should just carry on with my duties, and you know, and they would just stand and watch. And then, you know, if there had been a reason for them to say, what does this do, then they would have said, what does that do? But they didn't come and say, oh, let me tell you about this star, or let me tell you about that star, or anything like that. One of the things I had to do is put aside the baggage of Hollywood. We all know how Hollywood thinks things are supposed to go. According to Hollywood, when aliens come, there's supposed to be lights in the sky, and they're supposed to be pretty colored and move fast and have clever formations, and then they're supposed to land over there, and somebody's supposed to come out and do weird things. I really wasn't ready in the 60s for the idea that I would just walk around the corner of one of my weather shack, and there would be a man standing there the day I did at Range 1, and he wasn't human, and he was just standing there looking at me, and what he was doing is guarding the play area where the teacher and the children were playing. And you hadn't seen the craft, you hadn't seen the scout craft, you hadn't seen him come, you hadn't seen him leave. There was no reason for him to say anything, because there's no reason for you to know what he's doing there. He's just guarding the entrance to where the kids and the teacher are playing on that day. And if you feel like standing there and looking at him, well, that's fine with him. If you feel like running away, that's fine with him, because he's not human. He sees it differently. And it took me, you know, he's not human. He sees it differently. And it took me a while. It took me a very long time, several weeks, to get used to the idea that they are the way they are that way because they like themselves being that way. And that's different than the way Hollywood would have us think they were. And of course, one of the biggest shocks is they were so similar to us in so many ways. They love their children, they have a dry sense of humor, they love to tell jokes and laugh, and they get bored out of their gourd up in the base. One of the common things to talk about with the young, tall white women was fashions. You know, the Air Force provided them with clothes straight out of the Sears catalog. One of the jokes the teacher used to make about the Air Force generals is up on their base, in their commissary, there were some clothes that the generals had picked that they could choose from. And of course, the teacher used to say, well, all the American generals are all old men, so naturally they have no fashion sense, right? You know? And she used to laugh about the fashions that the generals thought they should wear, you see. And one of the things that she and the other young, tall white women wanted to do was to go into town and buy pretty clothes. And of course, we don't think of aliens that way, but when in my weather shack, I used to have a Sears catalog, a Montgomery Ward's catalog, a J.P. Penney's catalog. We had outdoor plumbing, and so I had several copies of the catalogs for several reasons. And one of the things that the young tall white women used to like to do is to come through and look through my catalogs. And what they'd be looking at are women's clothes. Sometimes when you'd see them out in the desert, or especially on the morning, what they'd be wearing were clearly clothes straight out of the Sears catalog or the Montgomery Ward's catalog, and they were very, you know, they were as proud of the new clothes as any Earth woman would be. And the teacher was very proud of her ability to dress up and look like a nurse, and it took me a long time to get over the baggage from Hollywood, because every time you look at a Hollywood movie, you know, aliens are supposed to be weird and different, you know. Yeah, and I really, you know, it was such a shock to have, like, the teacher walk in with, you know, wearing a new dress that she had bought from Sears and proudly show it off and say, what do you think of my dress, you know?
In the United States, close to 1 million missing person reports are filed every year. Whilst many of those reports are filed as protocol, quickly resolved and closed down, a worrying percentage of those are never even investigated. As I began my investigation, it quickly became apparent that there was a disturbing nature to these disappearances. And as I pursued each lead, I found myself embroiled in something I could never have expected. Little did I know that I would be contacted by a very covert, secretive individual who would blow the lid off what many of us believe to be the truth about our world. As you are reading this, you will not yet understand the very taboo nature of what we're dealing with.
I look at the alternative media, as it's called, which is where a film like this would come out of, which would come out of the mainstream. And what's developed over the years that this alternative media has come into being, what's developed is the alternative mainstream. And almost everyone has a here and no further point. And just because you are aware that there's a banking scam and a political scam and engineered wars, doesn't mean that your mind is open to the deep, deep, deep in the rabbit hole areas that will explain where all that's actually ultimately coming from. You will have people who will go so far, but then their belief system, their sense of credulity, will say here and no further.
Well, I think it's like a kind of human archetype. Unless you're a small boy with frogs in your pocket, people don't like toads or snakes or crocodiles or alligators. Dragons sometimes are shown as friendly, often are shown as dangerous and fire-breathing and nasty, and they've got little eyes, and they are inhuman. They've got little slitty eyes, and somehow there's a part of that doesn't resonate with us.
To think that reptilians even exist, let alone that they're in some way controlling the populace and what's going on, just seems so far out there to the normal person with their programming and their paradigm and that type of thing. So I think it's just out of the realm of belief for them, just through their programming.
The idea that life as we know it has only developed on this one planet, in this one slither of frequency, is ridiculous. But the human perception has been so programmed with limitation, with a sense of I can't, the sense of it cannot be, that it's left to very few, compared with the global population, to explore beyond that sense of can be.
This station
And
participates in the
that's
activation
why
of the public
films
safety
are
alert. Please
made
listen
in
carefully
greater
over the
abundance.
given message.
Creatures with large heads, with
This is an
fur,
alert localized
big
by the
eyes,
PD for Riverside,
like
Muldroff,
the
Rosewood,
traditional
and West
puppy dog
Point counties.
pictures that
A
make us
large
go,
military
"Oh,
presence
isn't
is
that
reported
cute?"
throughout Knox
One doesn't
County.
look at a reptile
They are
and think,
seen
"Oh,
turning
isn't that
away
cute?"
vehicles
That
going
basic
through or
human
out of
empathy
Knox
just
counties and
isn't
blockading
there.
entrances
What
and
I
exits.
do is I open
We
my
local
mind, I let the
authorities have
information
yet to
through my
receive any
guide,
clarity for this
and
purpose.
that decides
We
where I
recommend
go.
citizens to stay
Not
calm
preconceived
and wait for
idea.
further
And
news.
unfortunately, preconceived idea, belief, whatever that may be, is the prison cell for most people, and that's why they don't go beyond it.
I think there's a lot of ego involved in this subject, as there are in a lot of others, and that type of ego is infected ego, as far as I'm concerned. It's and the last thing these entities want is to be noticed. They want to be ignored, because if they're ignored, they can get away with it, you see. So you want to infect people and let them think that there's no such thing, and actually try and spread that there's no such thing, so that these things can operate in the darkness.
This is programming, and David Icke talks about this, a societal programming wherein we are conditioned to hate and fear this subject so much that without something extra, without something more unusual happening to us to cause us to search for this darker truth, people will be inclined not to see it, even if it's right in front of their face, which is what I've experienced. And even people in my own family and people that I know very well and people who were interested in ufology, when they saw this, either didn't see it or became very upset about it.
In the early 90s, when we were first learning about the reptilians, you tended to hear about cases of rape and situations like that, and almost like an instinctive fear that some people had in response to just being in their presence, just like a physiological reaction to them. So I think all of those factors, plus the bad reputation of snakes in Judeo-Christian mythology, has given them sort of a bad reputation, and that led to maybe a bit of a taboo in discussing them, but I don't think that the taboo is really necessary.
The gentleman I will call X in this article has always refused to give me his name. Of course that was highly suspicious. but he was giving me important, and in some cases classified information. I felt compelled to continue my investigation, even though I knew what I was doing was very dangerous. I never really questioned the validity of what he was telling me. Somehow I knew it was the truth, no matter how uncomfortable that made me feel. Sometimes X handed me documents, photographs, or newspaper articles to follow up. Other times he would drop a name into a conversation, only giving me pieces of the puzzle.
John, I can't just tell you what's going on. Those are the rules. You have to research this information yourself. I can give you places to look, people to see. Look up the work of Professor John Mack.
It was a synchronous event in the sense that I think anyone knows what I mean, is that you find out something just prior to experiencing it. And I'd read a couple of books a couple of months before. One of them was Dr. John Mack, the book Abduction. Now, Dr. John Mack, some viewers may know, is a gentleman who was a university professor of psychiatry at Harvard University. He was exposed to quite a number of people with experiences. He was a skeptic, did all the psychological testing, and he finally, in his two books, was firmly in the conclusion that these were real. These were real extraterrestrial encounters. I also read the book Communion, which is a classic with Whitley Strieber, an author again of sci-fi fiction, who also said he'd had experiences. But the first person that came through my door that said, "Mary, I've heard you're open-minded," was a gentleman called Ellis Taylor. And Ellis came to me via a friend, and the friend had told him I was open-minded, so he came to me really wanting to tell me about something. He said, "Mary, there's no support groups for this. For this, they just think you're a loony." And here I had a middle-aged, very articulate gentleman who was telling me quite normally that this is what was happening to him, that he was aware he was being taken up on spacecraft, that he was waking up with shaved areas on his body, other marks on his body. His whole family were affected, it was his partner and the children. He talked about going through walls, and he said no one would come to the house because they thought he was demons.
On the 13th of April, so I got up about 7 o'clock in the morning, went to the loo, came back to bed. My partner went with the covers off me. "What's all that all over your body?" And I had all these marks on my body, and I couldn't quite make them out, but she was really freaking out. And there was a face there, drawing of a face. There was like something there that looked like a tail or maybe a paw or something that we couldn't quite make out. And there were finger marks here in a strange configuration. And they were all red marks, and none of them had any impression. They just completely smooth. And then I was burnt all the way around as well, all around the rest of my body, bright red. My partner, as I said, was freaking out. She rushed to get her camera and came back and started taking photographs of them. And meanwhile, I looked in the mirror because I couldn't quite see what they were, and I could see what she was talking about because it's very distinct. And she took photographs of them very shortly after that.
Part of it is, the three questions they asked me is, am I going crazy? Is this real? And if it's real, why me? Three crucial questions. And so it was, okay, Mary, you better find out whether this really is real, or whether a lot of people are just having a very, very interesting, unusual experience that, you know, is more...
Military convoys have been seen establishing checkpoints near major intersections and rail exits. While no official quarantine order has been issued, emergency crews are working to restore services. So far, no fatalities have been reported. Internationally, the United Nations is open immediate dialogue following rising tensions along the border of two Eastern European nations. Diplomats are calling for restraint as negotiations continue behind closed doors. Back at home, a new proposal aimed at expanding public transportation access has been introduced in Parliament. Supporters believe it could ease traffic and reduce emissions, while opponents have raised concerns over long-term costs. A vote is expected later this week. Federal agencies are investigating a data breach affecting a major healthcare provider, with over 2 million patient records potentially exposed. Officials say the breach appears to have originated from a third-party contractor and are urging affected individuals to monitor their accounts for suspicious activity. The governor has declared a state of emergency in several coastal areas ahead of expected flooding this week. Heavy rainfall and rising tides are prompting evacuations in low-lying neighborhoods, with the National Guard deployed to assist local responders. In the tech sector, a leading electric vehicle manufacturer has announced plans to build a new battery facility in the Southwest. The project is expected to create over 4,000 jobs and begin operations in early 2027, pending regulatory approval. A new study from the National
Surprise,
Research
motherfucker!
Council suggests that urban green spaces significantly reduce stress and improve mental health. Researchers say even still,
Our friendship continues to grow, and it's gone in some weird and wonderful directions that I didn't expect. So, yeah, she's a lovely lady, and I'll forever be indebted to her.
What I was amazed to discover was many of those that had this experience, one, when they began to understand it, often their fear went, and often it's the fear of the unknown than what actually happened. And so I had to isolate, is it the...
Oh my ass.
Only maybe 20%, 30% are actually traumatized. And what amazed me were people eventually coming to me, and this is where I had to broaden my questionnaire, that saying, look Mary, we're not frightened of the ETs. In fact, we as a family, what scares us is being on a planet with humans that are so barbaric they still kill one another when they have a disagreement. It's actually because we don't do things like that. I feel like I've been done. I've been adopted in my own family. I feel like my family has, I've got something to do here, and this is why I'm here. And these I call the star seeds or star kids. That actually the human beings that they're operating or sharing their environment. So, in that sense, huge panorama of experience. Some are terrified of the beings, and some actually think the beings are family. So where do you go with that? Recently I had a young woman tell me that she was a hybrid and that she believed that she was part human, part reptilian, for example. So for her, what was hard was being in a human body when she related much to her reptilian soul, if you like. That's how she saw it. Others believe that their soul is from a mantid, which is an insect-like being. Some, the felines, the cat beings, for example, they say their origins are from those places. So they relate to that particular form. And if you have an 8-year-old that tells you that their family is a mantid, this is his human family is here to look after him, he loves them, but that's his family. When he dies, that's where he's going, to his ancestral family, which is the mantid insect-like being. And he gets quite emotional. This is an 8-year-old getting emotional about going back to his origins. It's very profound. And you've got others that believe they're a mix. And Simon Parks is one of those, because I was able with this young boy and Simon Parks, I was actually interacting with both of them at similar times in what's called the hemisphere, the southern hemisphere. They never spoke to me, but I was able to get information to look for a correlation. And Simon Parks believes his mother is a mantid, although he also connects to the cat, feline beings, and to the reptilians. But he feels most connected to the mantid. And he talks about going into his mantid form on the spacecraft, working with humans. And when I spoke to this little 8-year-old, he described it in this way, that he evaporated into his mantid form. and would operate as a mantid and then come back into his human form. So here is a little boy talking about a soul transfer.
One of the questions that pretty much all experiencers ask themselves at some point is, why me? You know, another one is, am I going crazy? But eventually they figure out that they're not crazy, that whatever they're experiencing, they're still functioning, and it's not, you know, it's not a form of anything. You know, John Maxer was not able to identify it as any kind of psychological pathology.
This station participates in the activation of the public safety alert. Please listen carefully over the given message.
The same thing seems to be true for reptilian contact.
This is an alert localized by the PD for Riverside, Muldrow, Rosewood, and West Point County. A large military presence is reported throughout Knox County. They are seen turning away vehicles going through or out of Knox counties and blockading entrances and exits. We local authorities have yet to receive any clarity for this purpose. We recommend citizens to stay calm and wait for further news.
People are chosen at random out of the human population. One abductee, one reptilian contactee described to me what she calls multi-dimensional simultaneous existence, because that time, basically, if you look into physics, ideas like the relativity of simultaneity and the concept of space-time, turns out that everything is happening now, including past and future events. Everything is really happening all at the same time. So past lives and future lives exist now. So what in reincarnation traditionally would think of as past lives, well, if you think of it as simultaneous multidimensional existence, those are really parallel lives. And there are situations, for instance, in dreaming where consciousness can move from one of these parallel lives to another. And that, you know, that explains why there is a connection between us and these other lives that we're living as reptilians. And it explains why some of the interactions go on.
My first experience that I'm aware of was when I was either 4 or 5 years old in Texas, where I encountered a brown being that was levitating in my bedroom, and it had round eyes, kind of a wrinkled face. If the viewer looks up the book Alien Jigsaw 2, the researcher's supplement, I think it's called, by Katarina Wilson, she has a drawing in there of a being she describes as a type 2 gray. And that's pretty much what I saw, except it wasn't gray, it was brownish. And that was the first consciously remembered. Actually, it wasn't conscious. I remembered it consciously for many years, and as is the case with many other abductees, suddenly I reached a certain age where I just forgot all about it. But prior to that, I was telling everyone I could about it, right? But then a point came in time where it was wiped from my conscious memory. Years later, after I moved to San Diego and became a member of the San Diego UFO Society, I had a hypnotic regression about some of my experiences, and although nothing new came up, what happened was my subconscious was kind of jarred and shaken around a bit, because like a day or two after I had that, what I thought was an unsuccessful hypnotic regression, I was reading a book called Project Omega, UFOs, NDEs, and the Mind at Large by Dr. Kenneth Ring, if memory serves. And at the end of that book, he has a questionnaire to determine if someone has had alien abduction experiences or not. And I basically answered yes to like 17 out of 22. And I got triggered when I had one question, when I read one question that asked, as a child, do you recall having experiences with little people or little friends that no one else could see? And then just as soon as I finished reading that question, bang, that memory of when I was in Texas when I was 4 or 5 years old came back. When I came back from Germany in 1990, I had a series of UFO experiences and abduction experiences culminating in a abduction, full waking consciousness at night, when those 3 reptilian greys came and they took me up into their ship, and they put me on examining table, and they did all this other stuff to me. And that was just one of a series of events. And then I was frustrated living in the San Francisco Bay Area because I had no one to talk to about these experiences. So when I moved to San Diego and joined the San Diego UFO Society, suddenly I could talk to other people about it. I can even talk to others who've had similar experiences. So it was a simple transition for me to become a researcher, because what I realized in my studies was after I had that full waking consciousness experience in September of 1990, when I came back from Germany, I immediately started researching the subject in earnest. Now, I'd always been interested in this subject, always been interested in Bigfoot, the Bermuda Triangle, other dimensions, so on and so forth. That was stuff I took for granted, including the subject of UFOs. But there was an element of me for years that was kind of scared of the UFO subject. There was something about the subject that gave me the creeps, that didn't that I couldn't quite understand, and that gave me a certain degree of fear. Like when I was in high school, for example, I would see beams of light, bluish white light coming through the ceiling, and do a search pattern on the floor. I had a lot of experiences where I was taken out of my body astrally. I've since come to find out that a lot of these experiences happen in our astral state, because these beings have the means to trigger an out-of-body experience within us. It's a multifaceted experience. It's not just physical abductions, it's astral experiences, it's what's been described as dream hacking or astral dreamscape manipulation, telepathic experiences, so on and so forth.
When an alien creature of any sort interacts with a human, 9 times out of 10, or 9.999 times out of 10, that human is going to be terrified of this creature. There is no long association with these creatures. They cannot appear as they look, because the human will just freak out, and whatever the purpose that they've come to that person for, they won't be able to do it. So they will come in disguise, and they don't physically change their body. They go into the mind of the human, and in the human's mind they change. Now, because of my very long association with these creatures, they don't need to do that now. In the early days they did, when I was a very small child. But also it was a part of me accepting them for what they were. So as a 5-year-old, or even, 1963, as a 3.5-year-old child, I was shown exactly what they looked like. And it did freak me out. Of course it did. But, if you take a child at 3 and stick it on an aeroplane and fly it from, I don't know, Birmingham Airport to London Airport, by the time that kid's 10, it will go from Heathrow to JFK with no worries, because it knows no different. If these creatures don't harm you, you have no reason to be scared of them. So it means that my perceptions are going to be more accurate than somebody who's half scared out of their mind, has their body frozen and can't move. So no, there are shadow creatures that are genuinely shadow beings. There are jinn that can appear as shadow creatures. And all of these entities that we're discussing have the ability to go into a human's mind and make that human think they're seeing anything. That's why Adolf Hitler got Dr. Mengele back in the late 30s to attempt to do work on humans that would prevent aliens from gaining control of their mind. And this is when Mengele just went completely off on his own tangent and ended up working for the Illuminati in America. But it originally stems from Hitler saying, because he was in contact with the Aldebaran off-world group, how can we have soldiers who can prevent all the information being taken out of their mind by these aliens? So that's where all this research started from. This is what totally scared the aliens. So for most people who have an alien experience, they really don't know what they're seeing, because they can only see with their eyes and believe what's happening. When you have an association with these creatures, and you can't be the only, but when you have a long association with them, you have certain agreements, and these creatures are not committed to deceive you. And I say I'm 54 now, and I haven't lied to me yet, or I haven't caught them out yet. So they're either incredibly good liars, but when I ask a straight question, I usually get an answer, or they will refuse to answer rather than give me
The revelation that the ever-growing missing persons reports were somehow connected to alien abduction phenomenon seemed ludicrous to me. There was something inside me that told me and I didn't know why. As a researcher and journalist, it is built into my psyche to question everything I'm told. When I raised my doubts about this one evening in a quick conversation with us, I could never have prepared myself for what happened.
Sorry, but I can't have you screaming like a little girl, so you've got to promise me you'll be quiet. If I wanted to harm you, you would be harmed. Please. Sit. You needed a reason to take this further, and I just gave it you. When I did this, I put both of us in danger. People like you don't meet people like me unless it's important. We consider you important, John. You're not special. You're not the chosen one. You're not the savior. But you're a hell of a journalist, which is good for us. Bad for you. What, you think this story was your idea? We needed to trigger you. That's what we do, John. We poke you, prod you, coerce you, make you do things we can't. Well, not openly anyway. For now, just know, some of us are trying to help. You got a friend in me.
I was in America on a speaking tour. I say a speaking tour. In those days, a speaking tour largely meant talking to myself. You know, I mean, I went to Chicago and spoke to 8 people, or near Chicago anyway. But on that speaking tour, over a period of about 15 days, I met 12 separate people, and I was going to a different place every day, who told me the same basic story, how they'd seen humans turn into a reptilian form and then back again. And it was such a common theme that they were describing that I started exploring from that time. So it came into my life very quickly. I'd had kind of heard like little mentions of it before and just let it go. But in this 15-day period, that really focused my mind. So there's something to look at here. When you're faced with that situation with, or you know, one person after another in different parts of America telling you the same thing, you can either go, I'm not going there, what will people say if I start talking about this stuff? Or you can say, information's my guide, I'm going there. What then happened is I came back from there to the Isle of Wight, and I was meeting someone, actually not very far from here, who had been married to a Satanist who had been the warden for Burnham Beeches. Burnham Beeches, out west of London, is owned by the City of London, the financial district. And it is a big place of Satanism and very strange happenings. It's wooded copses and few open areas. And she asked to meet me because what I was writing about, because she wanted to tell me about Satanism, which she experienced. And she told me when I met her about seeing Ted Heath, the former Prime Minister of Britain, took us into the European Union, doing a satanic ritual at Burnham Beeches, because she lived there in the warden's house. And when this conversation was finished, and you know, I was having a cup of tea, and I was just finished my tea, and I was putting it down and turning to go, and I just said to her as a throwaway line, you know, I've just come back from America, and I met all these people that kept telling me how they'd seen people turning to reptiles. And I heard her first, And I turned around, she's going, oh my God, I wasn't going to tell you about that. She said what happened was she saw lights and she took the dog out that night. And then she went through and looked through the trees at this light, and she saw Heath in this circle. And she said what she then saw was Heath shift into a reptilian form and grow about 2 feet, which is absolutely common in descriptions of this all over the world. And she said he started speaking then in a voice a bit like, she described it as a bit like the old transatlantic telephone. Is that when this happened, no one in the circle moved in any way that related to shock or surprise. It seemed to them the most common thing you could imagine. And from the American experience, and that lady too, then the synchronicity of my life started bringing more and more information in about it, and more people with experiences about it. And that's been the way my life has gone in the last 25 years. A subject will come out of nowhere into my life, and then suddenly, bang, information about that subject's coming from everywhere. And that's what happened with the reptilian thing.
There's a lot of people out there who are under the misapprehension that somehow all of this is promulgated by David Icke and nobody else, and this is absolutely not true. I was once privileged to sit at a dinner table with David Icke and Jordan Maxwell. David was on one side, Jordan was the other, and they started telling stories to each other. And I had a dictaphone in my pocket. Here's a piece of advice to any would-be journalists here who happen to be watching this. Always have a dictaphone in your pocket. You never know when it's going to be useful to you. So I asked their permission to put the dictaphone on the table. And then they were exchanging anecdotes with each other about reptilians, like a tennis match. It was fascinating. And I'll just give a couple of those, because they're more than interesting. I'll start with Jordan's story. I'll condense this as best I can. He was told this story by a grown woman who he knew personally about her experience when she was a small girl. And she came from an Air Force family and lived on a military base. And her father had the kind of job such that when the phone rang, sometimes he had 10 minutes to leave the house with a packed bag, and he might not be back for a couple of hours. And whenever that happened, the protocol was that she would not be in the house alone for any reason. And on this one occasion, she begged her father to be left in the house. She said, well, I'm a big girl now, I'm going to take care of myself, there's nothing to worry about. And her father demurred. And so there were guards on the outside of the house, and this was inside a secure installation. So they didn't do it seemed to be wrong. And she was in the house. She was younger, she was 11 or 12 years old or something like that. And the story that she reports was this. She said that a reptilian being, a large reptilian being, emerged from the walk-in closet. The reptilian being was so tall that it had to duck to get out of the door of the walk-in closet. And as this little girl froze in terror, this creature floated across the floor towards her. It didn't actually touch the ground. It clearly had designs on something that didn't seem to be very welcome to her. She ran to the bathroom, she locked herself in the bathroom, and she screamed and screamed and screamed as this creature clawed on the outside of the door. And then finally, the guards heard her, who were outside the house. They came rushing in, this was their job, and this creature disappeared. And the claw marks were visible on the outside of the door. When her father got back, she said, this is why you must never be in the house alone. And it's interesting because her father didn't even seem particularly astonished by what had happened. It was like this was one of the things that was known could happen. Go figure. This was told by this grown woman to Jordan Maxwell 20, 30 years later after this had all happened.
I have this sense that I've known them all my life, or known who they are all my life. But, and I can remember past life stuff with dragons and things like that, which is not exactly the same thing, I know. But this particular time, it was during a 47-day experience that included that 13th of April thing. 47 days it went on for, right? Night after night, day after day, left with patterns and marks and finger marks and all sorts of things going on. But during that time, I was sitting in the lounge and next to the loo, and to get from the lounge to the loo, you had to pass through the corner of the kitchen. You did a door here and then went through a door there. As I went through that door there, just going to go into that door there, it was tall. It was lots of ribbon. And it was kind of dark. It was green. It was kind of orangey slit eyes. It had a paler chest. It had like ridges and scales. But the thing about it was that it looked at me, and what I felt was, from it was, oh shit, it's something. It was more kind of worried that I'd seen it than having any kind of negative intent towards me or whatsoever. And I'm on the move as you're going to see this, and I'm just going to step into the hallway to go to the loo. And as I saw it, I was in mid-flight, so I couldn't stop immediately, so I went like that, came back, and the whole room was not the room. It was standing in the corner of the room, where the corner of the room should have been, but the room wasn't there.
I've had 3 experiences with the reptilians personally. The first one was late 2012. I was at home and I started to vibrate and get this ringing in my ears. And I was laying on the couch listening to the radio. It got to a certain point where I had my eyes were closed at the time. I had a flash. At that time I sat up and stood up and I was still vibrating, the ears were ringing, and all of a sudden I just got engulfed with white light and I appeared in this cave, is how I can put it. There was like a yellowish orange rock all around me, and right in front of me was what I thought straight away was a lizard man, because I still hadn't at this time checked up on reptilians. I heard about it, sort of, who knows, you know. And it was a yellowish brown colour, but they were about 6'2", 6'3", there was 3 of them. 2 of them that were directly in front of me were about 6'2", 6'3", around the same height. And there was a small one about 5'5", and it was the same. They had these things protruding from here. The eyes, nose was a bit down and stockier, and they were stocky, like muscly, stocky looking dudes. At that point, basically the main frame of what had happened was I was told by the reptilian in front of me that they're breaking up to factions basically, and that they want ascension too. This group. And I'm just thinking, why are you telling me? And they said, oh, well, this particular being in front of me said, because we want you to tell your people, like, put it in your book. And I was writing Operation Starseed at the time, and I'm just thinking, this is just, well, at this time, like, while this is going on to my left, about 50 metres in the distance, and this cave would have been a few hectares big, like a city block or something big, but it was, I couldn't see any entrances. I'm assuming down further to my left, there was an entrance, because there was a flying saucer with the grey walking around, and it had a bigger head than the normal ones I'd seen before. So this is, while that's going on 50 metres away to my left, and to my right I noticed like a screen. It was like 5 metres by 5 metres, I assume that was the diameter, and it was like a flat screen. If I looked at it, I didn't see anything, but if I looked at it in my peripheral vision, I could actually see a 3D hologram of the Earth coming out of it. And what I assumed was fault lines and earthquakes zones and the sort of mark out on it. I won't go particularly into what colours I saw on it and stuff, because that's just a little thing that I've kept for me, you know, people ask me. Around that time, a white light engulfed me again like you back at home, in the land, standing where I'd been previously.
In the high desert of Southern California, me and our team were doing what we call reptilian stakeouts. One of our friends, a female MyLab, in the high desert of Southern California, in the Victorville, Barstow area, was having frequent reptilian experiences. The reptilians were entering the house through a number of portal entries, one of which was in the children's bedroom. And this goes back to the lore about the boogeyman coming out of wardrobes, coming out of closets. That this is the basis for that, is that these entities, not just reptilians but other beings, they create these interdimensional energetic portal entries, which allows them, whether they're in our plane of existence from another dimension, or hovering in some spacecraft somewhere, they enter through these portal entries. And in the children's bedroom, there was this portal entry in the closet, the wardrobe, as they call it in the UK and other places. And me and my colleagues would do what we call reptilian stakeouts, where me and a MyLab buddy, we would flip a coin, and the winner would sleep on the bed, and the loser would sleep in a sleeping bag on the floor. And then the next night we'd alternate. And on one occasion, I woke up to find this large 6 foot tall plus reptilian, very robust, very large chest, very large biceps, very large muscles, looming over me as I laid there. I was immobilized, and I tried to call out to my friend, but I couldn't even manifest a squeak. It was like the power of speaking had been taken from me momentarily. And this being radiated this negative energy, which I liken to when some of the big cats in our world, when they emit a roar, the roar reverberates in the chest cavity of, say, a human being, and effectively paralyze the human being, and then the tiger, or whatever the case may be, can then attack and devour the person. Well, these beings, some of them, they emit a very negative energy, which makes one's skin crawl, and which induces paralysis. So I lay there for what seemed to be a long time while this thing was looming over me. And what was interesting, I forgot to mention, was there was also 3 or 4 members of our team outside in the living room, sleeping in sleeping bags, and they didn't hear anything.
The second experience happened in February 2013, and I just gone to bed at night, and I pulled back the doona, got in the bed, and I've laid down now. At the time I was sleeping, so the blinds were open, and there was a street light and there's moon light that can come in, so I can just, with all the activity going on, it's just so you can, also I could see, if I wake up in the middle of the night, I've got some reference for what the hell's going on, if it's in physical form. And I didn't feel alone. All of a sudden, I opened up my eyes, and like about 1.5 to 2 foot from my head on my right side was this huge eye. And it was, I could tell it was yellow, and there was a black slit pupil. Like it had to have been about this big. And it was a little graver. So it was only like 3.5. It wasn't big, but the head on it was huge. And I could see, you know, the scales on it. And again, that was what the Elohim had projected to me. So I'm like, this ain't good. I wasn't freaking out. The eye freaked me out a bit, but I wasn't freaking out from it. It was the vibration, or how it resonated with me. It didn't resonate with me. At this certain time, I closed my eyes and I started to, this thought came to me to, you know, why am I judging it? And to show it love, that I didn't want it, like, I guess the best way to explain it is I felt sorry for it being in the state that it was in. At which time it started to turn into like it started to look shocked. How I would have been looking at it, it started to look at me. And then all of a sudden it sort of turned into like a smoke, which I've got photos of how these beings can appear at certain times. That sort of turned into like this smoky substance, and it disappeared. And for about a year I didn't sleep in my room after that. I had to meditate till I went to sleep.
On another occasion in that house, there were different reptilians, basically all of the same species, but in different stages of maturation. And so there were immature reptoids, and we call them baby Godzillas, because when, like, the lady of the house and the children drew sketches, that's what came to me. They looked like little baby Godzillas. And one of these, at least one of these, was playing with the youngest daughter, who was like 4 years old at the time. They would play in that children's bedroom during the day, and the little reptoid was fascinated with the little girl's toys. In particular, one toy that looked like a telephone and that had big keys for numbers and letters, and when you pressed a given key, it emitted a certain tone. So the lady of the house, at odd times during the day, when only her little daughter was home, would hear these tones coming out of the bedroom. And on this one occasion, the little girl came out, and this little girl is now an adult. She has a child now. She said, "Mom, me and my friend, we're hungry, right?" And so my friend humored the little girl. She walked back into the bedroom with 2 platters with a slice of pizza on each one. When she walked into the bedroom, she noticed her daughter sitting Indian style on the floor, and alongside of her daughter was one of these little immature reptilian beings, and they were playing with that toy, making all these tones. My friend was so startled, she dropped both plates. The reptilian made kind of like a pig kind of squealing sound, and it fled into the closet and disappeared. Now, me and my friend, on another occasion, we were sleeping in that room again. I was in the bed, and he was on the floor, and I began to hear noises coming out of the closet, right? So I sat bolt upright, and I looked around, and I was punched in the face, bang, bang, on this cheek and on this cheek, and I was knocked out, and my cheeks ached for weeks thereafter. And I believe it was the little reptilian. It wasn't the big reptilian or big reptilians. It was one of the little ones, and it was just at the right height to punch me out. So I had a lot of experiences in that place. On another occasion, those reptilians followed me from that place in the high desert of Southern California to my house in San Diego, which is a good 2.5-hour drive. And I had just driven back from the high desert, settled down, I was laying in bed reading, and I fell asleep. And sometime later, I was rolled over in bed, and I was jabbed at the base of my spine with an injection. And as I was laid on my side, I looked over, and I saw what I at first thought was a very tall soldier in khaki uniform. And then I saw something swishing around behind it. Later on, in hindsight, I realized it was a very tall reptilian that just happened to be brownish khaki colored. Because when I had time to think about it, the thing that was swishing around behind it was his tail. And it was interesting because those reptilians had told my friend, the lady of the house, that they were going to get back at me basically for always going up there and like, I guess, annoying them or something. So they followed me back to hundreds of miles away to San Diego, and they did this to me. And I developed the following day. I was working at ComNav Airpack in communications, and my back was hurting me. I could feel a puncture wound at the base of my spine. I could feel it, an injection mark. And I had a terrific headache, and I was sitting in the main office, and there was an annex, another office off to the left, where the lady who worked in there was on leave or something. So I went in to lay down there just to flatten out my back, because my back hurt so much. Had a tremendous headache, was sweating profusely, big time diarrhea, right? And what was interesting was I went to an emergency ward, and I said to the lady, the nurse who was checking me out, I said, this is going to sound crazy, but last night I was rolled over on my side, and some soldier, some military-looking guy, very tall, like jabbed me at the base of my spine with a hypodermic needle, and she felt it. She said, yes, I see it. You know, I don't doubt you at all. Something happened. And then what was interesting was I called up my friend who was living in the high desert of Southern California, and she told me her husband and her son had all come down with similar symptoms after I had left.
I've spoken a couple of times at this conference in St Anne's in Lancashire called Probe International, and always something peculiar goes on there, right? Often on the way there as well, and often on the way back too. Now, when I left to go up there, I went with a friend, and I knew that I had two ethereal bodyguards. They were reptilian, dressed in armour, and I have a few guardians, but this is two that were with me. Big, powerful. So I knew that they were going with me for some reason. They wouldn't have come for no reason. So anyway, I get to the conference, and this guy comes up to us and he said, "Oh, would you and your mate take part in this demonstration that I'm giving on the stage?" I said, "What is it?" He said, "Well, what it is transfiguration." Now, transfiguration is you look at people, but I mean, I do it naturally anyway, but this is what he was telling people to do. You look at people and you look slightly out of focus to the side. You can see them turn and he's doing this thing in presentation. So he's got a huge white sheet. He's asked a few people to stand up on the stage in the audience, see if they can see anything with that person, or if they're changing. So I'm up on the stage, so I can see so. And this woman shouts out, "That guy in the white shirt. That guy in the white shirt, he's got two huge reptilians each side of him." What do you think?
I just taken my mum and a couple of friends out to go and see the class. I got told basically earlier that day that the class had been about, that I could take mum out there to show her, and mum hadn't seen anything up to that point. And it got to a certain point in the night where a crafty came down that low, just basically above Gumtree height, about the size of her house. And mum ran to the car door and she tried to open up the car and she's like, "We've got to go home." She freaked out, she thought they were going to land. So I said, "No, you've got to see this stuff, because I know you believe me, but you're definitely going to have something to go by, you know, but I need her to see this and go, oh, this shit's, you know, this stuff's for real." So we went back into town at that point because she freaked out. Dropped her off and another friend, and my friend who was staying with me at the time, Carol, who came to visit, we decided we'll go back out. Now at that time at home, she got a thought that we shouldn't be going back out, and so did I, but we didn't say anything to one another, which later on I said, if this happens again, let's tell each other. So we drive back out of town to where we were seeing the crafts, or where I told to go, and as soon as I got out of the car, she got out of the car too. We walked around to the back of the four-wheel drive to get out the equipment. And as soon as I'm turning to pull up the back of the boot, there was one of the Draco reptilians. It was basically behind Carol on an angle. Now, at this time, it was phasing in and out like a distortion, how would you say? It was sort of be like a hologram tuning in and out with static. And it was coming in and out. And straight away I just said to her, get in the car. I got into the car. At that time, like this would have only been 10 metres away. And it had horns, it's got the wings. I couldn't tell you what colour, but when they were projected to me, they were yellowish brown colour. Big, like maybe 8, 9 foot tall, something like. It was big, but it was only 10 metres away, and in the distance, maybe 150 metres away, is a street light out there. It's the only light in the whole area because it's out of town in a swimming area, like where people take their boats and their kids and have picnics. So because of that, I sort of had a good reference to see it. Even though, you know, usually you can see stuff with shadow dudes in the dark, you can still get something. But when we hopped in the car at this time, the lights on the interior, on the speedo, on the dashboard, and the outside lights all turned on at different times. They were all, you know, it was like a disco of lights. No reason for it to be happening. I'm trying to turn on the car, and after some time I just sort of blasted it with love in my mind anyway. And it got a little bit more intense, and then I did it again. Then all of a sudden, like in my mind, it's just like, just start the car. And the car started at that time, so I've reversed out, clawed it out of there, and got on my way. Now, I haven't got, you know, really messages from the reptilians or anything like that. They seem to have been put in my way, and it's like I'm a beacon for them in some ways, because once I think you're awakened to a certain point, things will come through. And I think that's what I'm for. So there's a fairly experience that I have.
3, maybe 4 years ago, I went to Australia, and I went through Heathrow, and almost everybody in this, lots of people at Heathrow were shape-shifting. There were reptilians walking around everywhere. Now, some of this can be you decoding something about their aura, but other times it can be you're decoding what is really there rather than what their emotions are projecting. And I've had that instance in Macquarie Shopping Centre in Sydney as well, where nearly everybody there is looking like is a reptilian, and full on, and they're much taller than they are as humans, and they're much bigger and much more powerful, big tails and all the rest of it. It's full on. Then they just I got on the plane, and they swapped my seat for some reason, and I sat down in this other seat, and I noticed there was an Indian lady in the sari and everything sitting there, and she was looking at me intently like that, but her eyes were really lovely. She was really kind of, you could tell it was really loving whatever she was doing. She was doing something. I saw this guy in a seat in front of me just a look. He rose up and turned into this huge reptilian, really aggressive. This air hostess came to me, and this don't happen, does it? She knelt down next to me, she put her hand on my knee, and she was going, "We're going to look after you. Everything will be all right." And then this Indian lady, I heard this voice in my mind, it was definitely coming from her, and she said, "You are a golden child and very special, we are looking after you." And I thought, what's a golden child? I don't know. But that's what she said. Yeah, maybe, I don't know.
On another occasion, myself and a female MyLab friend were abducted together, and we were brought to an underground base in the high desert of Southern California, once again in the Victorville, Barstow area, and we were confronted by what appeared to us to be 3 military people. Again, one of them was taller than the other two. The one that was the tallest was standing behind a lectern or a podium, and it was quite tall, and it was yelling at my friend and I. We were kind of made to stand at attention, several feet away from these 3 beings. They appeared as military personnel with the short hair, etc., etc., but one of them was in the guise of a high-ranking officer, and the high-ranking officer was irate. It was screaming at us, yelling at us, what are we doing? Like, how do we know so much, right? And I knew immediately that this tall being was not a human. I knew that it was really a reptilian because they often assume the guise of military personnel. Sometimes these abductees in my labs in the underground bases can look at what's supposed to be a military person, but notice that they have vertical pupils, or notice that they don't communicate much, and once in a while they growl or they hiss or they do something to give themselves away. And while this tall general or this tall officer was berating the both of us, I looked at my friend and I said, this is not a dream, this is real. We're having a real experience here, so remember this, right? And then the being, the assumed supposed military guy just kept yelling at us. Eventually they sent us back. The reptilian symbology, which is common in the folkloric traditions of countless cultures throughout the planet and throughout history, is not so much a metaphor or an archetype as it is a way to describe the existence of these beings, that they really have existed all this time, and that they've played a role in the development of civilization, that they've intervened at critical points in human history. So this is why we are constantly bombarded with reptile symbology, serpent symbology, dragons, and so forth. It's not to do with any archetype or metaphor. It has to do with the existence of these beings and the occulted knowledge going way back that these beings are here and they've been involved in this all along.
One of the important things throughout all of their interaction with humanity was not to be recognized and not to be seen, because humans record in stone. We're very good at that. We create. We're fantastic like that as a race. So they recreate, and the reptilians didn't want that. You will see it occasionally in some of the Sumerian or Assyrian, Babylonian carvings. Occasionally, you will also see it in some of the Mayan or Aztec items. What you're much more likely to see are renditions of feline species from the Egyptian, because they weren't covered by the same protocol. So they weren't. There was no ban on depicting them. Whereas there is a ban, there still is now a ban on depicting reptilians, and I'll give you absolute proof of that when I did that very nice interview on the Today program with Holly Willoughby and Schofield, and I did two drawings, one of a mantis and one of a reptile, and I was told point blank we're not allowed to put the reptile up because they were going to have me as a backdrop, them as a backdrop to me. So the stills I've got, because of the time sent me, I'm being interviewed with them, and behind me is a picture of the mantis. But originally, Schofield and gang were going to have a mantis and a reptile, and somebody very high up said we're not allowed. They didn't even know what it was called. All they said to me was, we've been told we can't put this one up. So there's a blanket that goes on, and hence, if you think about what your title of this DVD is, because we're coming around to that now, and you think about that chapter in The Greatest Secret that David Icke wrote, which was don't mention the reptiles, and that's a fact, and David's absolutely right, that the system doesn't want to publicise them because they've signed an agreement not to publicise them. It's to keep them out. So you can talk about the greys as much as you want. That's what you can talk about mantis as much as you want, because they don't manipulate humanity. The reptile race that we're talking about manipulates humanity and has done for thousands of years, and has a covenant with the elite humans who run the world that they will always be in the shadow.
You're awfully quiet, John. I feel a little underwhelmed for a man who asks questions for a living. I've got another question. But let's start with my boss. Is he... John, what if a man's faults are not his own? What if certain men and women were pliable, manageable, accessible? You mean controlled? There are levels of control, John, depending on the situation. This situation required a little show and tell. Others are a little more intrusive. Behind the scenes, deals were done, but they weren't necessarily beneficial to the populace. In modern times, phase one has always been to make you aware of our presence. Over time, we could gain acceptance through the use of literature, religion, music, movies.
If you look at two themes of movies in recent times, and some of them not so recent times, but there's a big theme now, and I don't go to the movies very much because it's all very violence and stuff like that. But if it's for my research, I'll obviously go. One is a kind of a reptilian theme that you pick up, and the other one is, you know, many times incorporated into the reptilian theme, and in alien invasions, is a well beyond Orwellian society where humans are under total control of a vicious police state and a tiny elite.
As far as movies and media being possible leaks to the truth about non-humans, or in particular the reptilians, I think this is certainly possible, and I think that there are several movies that stand out in my mind as being movies that might be leaks. Well, in particular, Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, for which I think that he was murdered. He was warned not to publish it, and he said, "To heck with you," and he was killed shortly after the release of the movie. And also Rosemary's Baby shows even a reptilian kind of baby at the end of the movie, and that those kind of movies seem to be kind of more realistic leaks, if you were. And then you have John Carpenter's They Live and The Thing and Aliens, which I think are all possible relevant information or visions, you might say, inspirations for what's really happening.
I think if you look at John Carpenter, the creator of They Live, you look at his movie-making history, which includes Satanism and horror and what have you. This guy has at least some knowledge of what's happening. And I had to laugh. I said this in a book once, years ago, and someone wrote to John Carpenter saying what I'd said. And he wrote back to him, I saw the letter, saying, no, it wasn't. The aliens, you know, inside the people, I was symbolizing the Republicans. And you go, yeah, John, all right, yeah, okay, you were. Yeah. I mean, anyone who's seen They Live will laugh at that.
And I watched They Live about 4 or 5 years ago, I think, on the internet, on YouTube. I watched it. Now that is so real. What I found in life is that very often things that I find distressing or are distressing for me at the time, I don't watch. I don't know why, but I don't watch. People say, oh, you should watch this, and I don't. And then it comes to a point where I feel that, yeah, okay, I'll watch that or I'll read that. And I will, and then I know why it was I didn't watch it before. I wasn't ready to sort of integrate that into where I was at the time. But They Live are so accurate. So accurate.
They Live. It's classic. And that time back too, where you have a small number of people who are actually not what they seem. They look human to people in everyday life, but when the guy put the sunglasses on that allowed him to decode reality on another level, that was the symbolism of it, he saw that they actually, behind the human form, they weren't human at all.
And they were the people in power. They were the bankers. They were the politicians. They were the president. They were some of the police. Also, when he put the glasses on that subliminal level, he could see all the subliminal messages all around him, telling him to stay asleep, to not question, to obey authority. And it was a movie, it was kind of a B movie, wasn't it? A kind of, most people would never have heard of, and yet it was way ahead of its time in portraying the world that we're actually living in.
The Super Mario Brothers, if anyone gets a chance to see that movie, it's amazing. In the old video store days, you would find this movie in the children's section. The story starts out with a celestially driven cataclysm. An asteroid comes and wipes out the dinosaurs, and through some kind of weird kind of alchemical process, an alternate reality is created where the survivors of the reptile survivors of the surface went underground into an alternate dimension, and they became the rulers, and they were shapeshifters. They were shapeshift between human and reptilian. The head reptile was Dennis Hopper, if you've ever seen that movie. And it was another dimension that was parallel to our dimension. And it had to do with bloodlines, it had to do with all kinds of stuff. And of course, the protagonists, Luigi and Mario, they defeat the reptilians, right? Very interesting story.
When I was growing up in the 70s, a TV show that I really loved was Land of the Lost. It involved a pocket universe where dinosaurs lived and advanced beings who turned out to be the ancestors of these primitive Sleestaks had built these pylons, which were devices used for interdimensional travel and time travel, as well as such things as regulating the weather in the Land of the Lost. But the Sleestaks, which the advanced beings, they called them the Altrusians, eventually evolved into were like barbaric, kind of vaguely reptilian beings that lived underground. They were very tall and menacing, but there's some definite parallels between the storylines in Land of the Lost and the research on reptilians living underground and being able to travel through portals and so forth.
Last year, the movie came out, Ender's Game, a wonderful story about how we're assuming that these inhuman insectoid ETs are somehow hostile and dangerous to us just because we've got this mindset of fighting everything out there that moves, and actually they're not. This is not what we're trying to do at all. And again, it takes a little kid to have the wisdom to actually discern what's really happening.
Another show that I'm fascinated with is Thundercats. I've only watched a few episodes of that, but again, it deals with these feline aliens that are battling the reptilians, and all these different races allied with the reptilians. There's canine beings, there's wolf beings, there's bird beings. Some are aligned on one side or the other, and some want to be neutral. And many of these different ET races are depicted in the Thundercats cartoon. Fascinating. I wish I'd seen it when I was younger. Another show is the original V that shows these human-looking aliens coming in huge craft, but in reality they're reptilians, and they eventually can gain control of politics, the media, and everything else. And then a small band of resistance fighters develops, led by a woman. And there's a lot of metaphorical, metaphysical truth behind that, because some of the best spiritual warriors I've found are women. They're heart-centered, they have all these abilities, they don't operate from a place of ego, and they don't need accolades, they don't need fame or fortune. They tend to operate, the real players tend to operate on their own, under the radar. And many of them are women. So when I see this TV show, V, and it's led by a woman scientist or something, if my memory serves, that really resonated with me.
You've got to start immediately with 2001: A Space Odyssey. That's how you start, and then you would do the original Star Trek, because Gene Roddenberry not only went out and found contactees, but he actually joined a circle of people who were channeling other entities. So these people either, as directors or producers, either have direct knowledge or more likely it's a give and take with the security services. The security service will say, okay, you've done us a favour, here's an idea. It's not really an idea, it's something they know, but let's run with the idea. Where it's become insidious, and that's why I'm a bit unwilling to help you out with this too much, is because they will use the media to play out an agenda for them to test its reaction on the audience. And the first time that occurred was in 1938. Was it 38 when Orson Welles did War of the Worlds? What people don't know was that was all orchestrated to early sort of focus groups to feed back on what the situation was. And that actually wasn't panic, as the media was told. There was only a small pocket of panic, but they wanted to create panic. So that's why all the mainstream media said there was mass panic, because that was the argument. That's why we're not going to go public with what's happening.
What is happening, I would suggest, is that subconsciously there are so many with the same theme, it's laughable. Subconsciously, the human mind is being made familiar with something that if it wasn't made familiar with subconsciously in this way, when it is revealed, people would be in a massive state of shock, whereas they're bringing it in slowly. So what they're doing is that on one level, they are preparing people to be familiar with and therefore be far more likely to accept without resistance the very Orwellian society that's being brought in by these reptilian hybrid bloodlines, because this archontic force has been working to manipulate human society over these, what we call in our version of time, thousands of years, to reach this point where they can take the whole thing over and turn humans into a slave race. Now, this is interesting, given what I talked about in terms of this archontic reptilian force cannot create itself. It has to piggyback that which is already created. It cannot create the Orwellian society. It has to manipulate us to do it.
They have to let us know what they're doing or what they're going to do before they do it. It's kind of like a rule of the game from their point of view. And if you see it this way, it gets them off the karmic hook. What I mean by that is that if I were to tell you, the viewer watching this now, that I intended to burgle their house tonight, and I was going to do it by climbing in this window at 2 o'clock in the morning, and this is what I was going to go and steal. And if I told them that, and they didn't believe me, and they took no action, and I went and did it anyway, then I would be off the karmic hook, because it's their fault for not securing the window latch. It's their fault for not standing there with a gun waiting for me to come. It's their fault for not taking me seriously. It's like, well, I told you, and it happened, so now the responsibility is yours, not mine.
Media nowadays, major Hollywood films, are used to push an ideal which is either part of a programming agenda or it's an agenda to test out what the reaction is on the public. Any decent producer in Hollywood who is doing a science fiction or science fantasy film now will be heavily involved with the secret government or the secret service, whatever we want to call them, for a give and take, an exchange of ideas. If you look at Stanley Kubrick made his own deal that he could make as many films as he wanted and have oversight over it, providing he never told the truth about the supposed moon landings. And as soon as he broke that agreement, they killed him. So right through history from Hollywood is an integral arm of manipulation, mind control, and just focus grouping, just testing. So anyone who has an interest will look at a film and say, well, look at that, look at that.
I think someone has made an effort to enlighten the people so they really know what's going on, whether it's done for malign in-your-face purposes or it's done, at least some of it is done to wake people up. Who knows? But I do know that this process is ongoing.
There are a whole bunch of different possible agendas going on with the sowing of these concepts in Hollywood. But to condense everything down into one short sentence is no accident. It's certainly
Here to do it, you with you. There's been a tremendous amount of scrutiny of my experience, and you know, it being so questioned, but I had to realize that you know, this is pretty strong stuff, and a certain amount of you know, people taking a hard look at it is warranted. You know, I agree with Carl Sagan when he says extraordinary claims deserve extraordinary evidence. So that's fine. It's when people draw conclusions about the subject in general, or about my case in particular, without having referenced the facts, or all of the facts of the case, that I really take exception. You know, I think it's in today's world to first get the facts, you know, and everybody's free to blab out their opinion as they want, and the internet has made that abundantly clear. People are out there saying whichever and whatever. You know, there's a certain social responsibility that we all have to know what we're talking about before we open our mouth. Well, the Hollywood experience was a real awakening. You know, we all have a lot of preconceptions about how that would be. And to be honest, a lot of my preconceptions were negative, so I turned down a lot of offers before Tracy Tornay came along. You know, he persuaded me that this would be an ideal opportunity to allow people to experience this thing as we did when it happened, and that might you know, create a greater openness to, you know, taking a look at the facts, you know, and so I agreed, and you know, Tracy did fight hard to keep things as close to the facts as possible, but you know, any Hollywood endeavor is really a pretty big committee, you know, and the farther up the ladder the project goes, the more diverse the voices, influential they are in the outcome. So as time went on, there were departures that not everyone's been happy with, but in the end, I think it still remained as a product that, to a large extent, communicated the emotional impact it had on us when we experienced it. And, you know, that was the main purpose in agreeing to the movie. And, you know, I sort of knew from the start it wasn't going to be a docudrama. Hollywood doesn't do that. And anybody who really knows very much about the background of any true life story that gets made into a Hollywood movie knows that they very rarely stick strictly to the facts. It's just, you know, Hollywood is full of creative people, and they like to be creative. So, but like I say, you know, the net effect was good. It would be nice if certain things hadn't gone so far.
This station participates in the activation of the public safety alert. Please listen carefully over the given message.
This is an alert localized by the PD for Riverside, Muldrow, Rosewood, and West Point County. A large military presence is reported throughout Knox County. They are seen turning away vehicles going through or out of Knox counties and blockading entrances and exits.
But I just have to keep reminding myself from time to time just how much time has gone by, because, you know, it's 34 years this fall, and wow, that's a long time. And yet, so much of my life has been determined by that one decision to get out of that truck. And I definitely, if I had it to do over again, would not get out of the truck. And that's not to say that I view the ensuing events as 100% negative. It's just that, you know, even finding some positive things that came out of it all, that sort of knowledge, insight, and understanding was gained at a pretty dear price. So I'd rather that hadn't happened, actually. Well, it would be nice if somehow this could be turned into something that would have a really positive effect in promoting, you know, understanding and, you know, just betterment of humankind. I'm sure that's a goal everybody would want. When I'm talking about my experience, I try.
We local authorities have yet to receive any clarity for this purpose. We recommend citizens to stay calm and wait for further news.
Because, you know, or if I do that, I try to label it as so, because you know, so much of what happened to me is like a fragment of something it's just really too incomplete to me to draw conclusions about. And so, you know, I think the fairest examination, you know, is if I leave it open to analysis later. Maybe with more information and more knowledge, I'll be able to draw more conclusions in the future. From the time I got out of the truck and you know, left the crew, you know, they were yelling at me to get away from there. You know, it was a rather impulsive thing to do, and I was regretting it almost as quickly as I did it. And the things that they were saying and the feeling of impending danger, you know, even some of the guys in the truck said that it just felt like something was about to happen. You know, they just had that feeling that of something impending. You know. And I don't know, I guess I had that feeling too, and I really slowed down as I approached it and had a lot of misgivings about what I was doing. There was a kind of a weird feeling in the air, which may have been some sort of staticky electrical field or maybe magnetic or something. But at the same time, the sound was just extended off of both ranges, the high and the low of human hearing. You know, to where the lows were something you really felt more than heard, and the you know, the highs were kind of like something that was like inside your head rather than coming through your ear. It was just such an intense sound with a wide range of frequencies there. But the men in the truck kind of felt a vibration that you know, seemed to shake everything. And maybe that's what contributed that feeling that something was about to explode or something was about to happen. And it may have been nothing more than just a buildup of electricity or some sort of charge of energy of some kind in this craft, that when I raised up and created, narrowed the gap between my body and it, that being the closest thing there, caused this discharge that injured or did whatever to me. You know, some people speculate that the reason I was kept so long was that maybe they were just, you know, took that long to repair the damage, you know. But some people think it was a deliberate shot and that they, you know, did that for the purpose of taking me. But I really do think it was more being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or doing the wrong thing at the wrong time by getting too close. You know, interest or at least obligation of some kind, you know. If it was unplanned and it was just something that happened because of my unexpected approach, then that would explain it. But, you know, how much planning or deliberateness it was on their part, I guess there's a part of me that just prefers to not think that there was anything, you know, that I was set apart or chosen in any way, because, you know, that might mean that it's not over or something. And I like to think that it's definitely 34 years in the past. Well, You know, some people have speculated that there may have been some sort of time contraction perception on my part because I recalled such a short period of time. But then on the other hand, it might have been just that I was unconscious most of the time and became conscious either shortly after I was brought aboard or shortly after I was let off. Or somewhere in between, and that maybe, and then another possibility is there was conscious parts that I can't recall during that 5 days. But that would be disconcerting if that were the case. I did have some pretty vivid dreams at one period. You know, right after the movie came out, and I was doing a lot of talking about it again after so long. Not that it, was bringing a lot to the front of my mind, and maybe that's just what inspired these dreams. Just had some extra dreams that were different than my memories, but just dreams. Probably the only euphoria I felt was that finally I'm out of there. At least that I can recall, There may have been other periods in the 5 days, if there was any other conscious period where I had a different mood or different attitude towards it, but all I can remember is a lot of fear and relief when it was over. Well, a lot of people that have experiences of this sort, report, feeling like they're on a mission or they're, chosen for some important destiny, but I haven't come to that conclusion. I do feel that I do have an obligation to try to make it something that's as beneficial to my life and to the lives of those who hear about it as I can. But I wouldn't really call it a mission. It's just it comes with the territory. I have a unique perspective that I need to share. And it only goes so far. When I woke up, I didn't come to very quickly. I was in and out for quite a lot of time. I was in a lot of pain, so it took me a while to kind of gather my thoughts and figure out where I was, which at first I thought was just a hospital. I remembered the incident in the woods eventually, but I thought, maybe I'd just been hurt and they'd taken me to a hospital. And the sounds of movement around me, I just thought, well, that's the doctors. And, when I finally got where I could focus my eyes and saw them is when I just flipped out because, seeing these things was just a real shock because, I'd never seen anything like that. And at the same time, I'm having all this pain and this feeling of suffocation, which just kind of gave me a panicky feeling to start with. So that explains a lot of why I reacted to what some people think is so badly. People say, "Oh, well, I would just remain calm and ask them this question and that question." But I guess everybody has their own approach to things. Maybe they'd be surprised at how they would react. But it was, the things I recall don't really make a tremendous amount of sense by themselves. I was looking for a way out and was eventually taken out by a person I took to be human. It may have been. I wasn't getting any answers. I thought this meant I'd finally, have some understanding of what was happening to me. But all they did was want to apparently get me unconscious as quickly as they could. There was a room in which there were points of light against a dark background. Now, I don't know whether this was like a planetarium where you're projecting points of light on a dark surface, or if this was some sort of a device of projecting a view of what was outside the craft at that moment. But I do know that when you moved the controls on the chair, it could cause the pattern to move. All the stars moved in unison. They didn't rearrange their pattern. They moved, and that was really disorienting because it was all around. It was projected even on the floor. So I didn't want to do that again, and so I left that alone. But I don't know if I'd call that a star map, but it really seems like, why would anybody need that, you know, to me? It seemed like if they were more technological, maybe it would just be nothing but a bunch of numbers. I don't know. It looked like a very direct sort of control of that craft. And to open a door, and some of them didn't seem to do anything. They lighted buttons, just a button, you know, they press. And there was a screen there that there were black lines on it, long black lines that covered the entire screen from one end to the other with little segments on them. And they would change angle and sort of move, but there was no symbols, no reference. So why would this line need to slide up and slide like this if there's no symbol to designate where it is? But the buttons seemed to change that. So I don't know, maybe it was what was enclosed by that had meaning to them. But there was no symbols, no letters, numbers. Kind of a funny thing there, but I, you know, kind of my better judgment was to stop messing with that. I could make things worse for myself. So it was with great relief that this human-looking individual came in and took me out of there. No, you know, I ran upstream and, you know, babbling all kinds of questions, but I, you know, wasn't getting any response. It wasn't like it was just robotic or anything. It was a little bit of maybe wincing when I was yelling or something, but and a sort of a faint smile, but very little reaction. But it was like more of a subdued or suppressed reaction as he took me out of there. It wasn't unkind or hostile, but it wasn't real encouraging as far as getting any information out of me. But I figured maybe he'll tell me when we get out of here. Take that helmet off, whatever. But the people who were dressed like him that he left me with weren't any more informative. They didn't answer anything. No sounds. It's almost like they didn't want to, you know, to have the most minimum kind of interaction that they could with me. Because they were hiding something, or because I was in such a crazy state, I don't know. But that's the way it seemed to me. But I was just glad to find myself outside the craft and in more familiar surroundings. And, you know, I wasn't regretting having not solved any mysteries or anything. I just wanted to be out of there and back home as quick as I could. Next thing I can recall after the experiences was waking up on the roadway outside of Heber and making my way into the town and trying to find a telephone that worked. And I went into these telephone booths and I went into the first one and picked up the phone and it was out of order, which kind of made me feel this surge of desperation. What if these phones don't work? But the next one did work. And the interesting thing is that nowhere on the mountain in any of those towns around there are there any more phone booths. But those phone booths are still there. They're kind of like been preserved all this time because the telephone operator listened in on the call and then knew for a fact that, you know, that report came from there. This is an answer to the skeptics' charges that I was really at my mother's house in Snowflake or some other place. But, you know, the sheriff found out from the phone company that that call was made from that phone booth at that time. So we have a row of phone booths there, and he were the only ones left on the mountain. Well, at that time, you didn't even have to have a coin to talk to the operator, and so you just pick it up and dial O, and you can talk to the operator. They can't do that now because they would be kept constantly busy with people taking advantage of that. But that's the way it was at the time, so I made a collect call to my family, and operator listened in, reported it to the sheriff, who sent a man right out there who got there right after my family did, picked me up and took me back to Snowflake. Well, I did not, when I was returned, I didn't encounter my co-workers, any of them, for several days. My brother had become extremely concerned about my welfare because of the mob, the circus that was going on in town, the intrusions, and of course some of the phone calls were kind of sinister too. There were some warning calls about people that, there was a woman who was a nurse who said there was an elderly couple who had had an experience like this in the hospital where she worked, and when she went off shift, they were there, and when she came back, they were gone, and all records were gone too, and everybody was saying, "No, what are you talking about?" So, they said, she said, just be aware of that. And then this other guy called, he said he was in the CIA, and again, warned, don't let him, just be handed off to the authorities. So my brother took that to heart and kind of kept me away from everybody for a while, for a few days, which, naturally upset the sheriff, but it also kept me away from my coworkers, which had me doing a lot of reality testing, These people are all saying I'm crazy and acting like I'm crazy, I didn't have their corroboration like it would have been if we'd have said, yeah, we went through this. It would have been a lot easier for me to not do this reality testing and say, do more coping with what happened than wondering whether it did or not. Every authority figure around me trying to tell me, no, it didn't happen, and everything in my mind told me it did. So when I finally did meet up with the rest of the crew later, it was very helpful. And, as time went on, more of the outside evidence, independent evidence, came back to me. A lot of it was kept away from me, things the sheriff was aware of and things that went into his file that, people who were in the area, hunters and campers and people who had seen things that he was aware of, he never told me about. So, as time went on, it got slowly better, but it's something, the trauma of which has just never completely left me, and there's still a certain amount of coping to do, even to this day. And something has a tendency to cause my mind to want to go somewhere else, once I've been on the subject, and I guess I've kind of reached that point with this interview too. So. Sure. People who have had similar experiences or recall having had such experiences will ask me, what should I do? I really hesitate to advise them because, on the one hand, it had been, real cathartic to, have this validated in some sense by researchers and people with similar experiences. But on the other hand, I've subjected myself to a lot of flack over the years that really been a heavy price that I've been aware of every single day, working amongst people that, there's always an undercurrent there. It helps that I can overcome it just by being me, just keep on being me, and then eventually they, have to do a double take. They have all sorts of preconceptions that I'm finally able to shake them out of. But it's the fact that those prejudices exist before I even meet somebody that it's been a continual obstacle in my life. But as time goes on, the more and more people who have an opportunity to know the real me can relate what they've learned to other people. You know, a lot of people were claiming to have been my best friend, or, you know, we were buddies in high school and all this stuff, and people I barely knew, so, and, you know, they're an authority on me and my character, you know, for the good or for the bad, either one, but, you know, they want to say they had close ties. Sometimes it's kind of funny. Mike Rogers was in a place one time, and this guy was bragging how he knew Mike Rogers and Travis Walton, knew all about him, and Mike was standing right there. Yeah, I know them guys, you know, they're like this and like that, you know. And Mike just kind of smiled to himself, didn't ever let the guy know that that was him. And I kind of take it that way too. I've had people come up to me and say, you know, you look a lot like Travis Walton. And I say, I get that all the time. Yeah, it's something I try to live a normal life, and you know, as far as the family is concerned, you know, I just don't let it dominate the topic all the time. And, you know, it's not like it's some hush-hush or taboo thing, but you know, we just try to live our day-to-day lives without dwelling on the subject. Well, you know, having gone through what I've gone through in my life, it gives me a kind of unique perspective at a dear price, but you know, I think I've gained a lot of insight. It's sort of like being on the outside looking in some ways. I've got a lot of insight into people, human nature, you know, how our minds go through some real backflips when confronted with you know, information or evidence that we don't want to accept you know, the conclusion to which it's leading us. So I think we could all use a little more maturity in that area, that you know, we're just willing to let the facts direct us to whatever, you know, whatever is. I've gained a lot of insight about you know, the so-called experts. You know, in many ways, there's some people who have a lot of inside information, but they're not necessarily the ones that are ostensibly in control. You know, on the face of it, the people who we take to be our quote leaders are just really figureheads that are just riding the same way we are. They're you know, this train's barreling forward and there's nobody driving. But, you know, each of us have our own ability to sort of direct things if we quit adopting the attitude of let George take care of it. You know, we all have a certain responsibility to try to shepherd the truth when we can and do our part. You know, we might not be able to affect everything and everybody, but, you know, for our part, it's better to be part of the solution than part of the problem. And as I was discussing earlier, I've come to realize that in the field of ufology and this general topic, that there's a real unevenness in the quality of the investigative procedures being followed. And I think it would be very helpful if there were some sort of a guideline or set of guidelines that everyone agreed on would be the proper way to conduct an investigation or to evaluate a given case. And so, you know, having gone through this directly, I think that I might even take that upon myself, not just to be the sole author of these, you know, suggestions or guidelines, but maybe to, you know, take the input from as many investigators as possible, and maybe correlate these into and digest those into a coherent whole, and then put that back out to these investigators for critique, and in the end, maybe get some consensus on the best way to, you know, investigate and evaluate various cases as they come
for.
just like the rest of us. Every day he has to make all kinds of decisions, like what to wear, whom to date, and when to marry.
Wrong place, pal.
Get the fuck out of here!
Just like the rest of us, every day he has to make all kinds of decisions. Like what to wear, whom to date, and when to spend. Now, these decisions should be easy, but you'll see why he sometimes has trouble.
thing.
We need to get through. thing.
What's better than a Spiffo burger? Still thinking? Well, here's a clue. Double XL bacon. Next time you're in a participating Spiffo store, just use the magic words, unleash the bacon, and watch delicious happen.
Coming in. Get that thing open. Destroy that shit. Break it down. Break it down. Get that thing open.
I want you out of here. Now! out of here! Get the fuck out of here!
Break it down.
That thing open.
Public safety alert. There is an outbreak of violent behavior in There is an outbreak of violent behavior in the area. Stay indoors and lock your doors. This is a public safety alert. There is an outbreak of violent behavior in the area.
Get the fuck out of here!
We're coming in.
What's better than a Spiffo burger? Still thinking? Well, here's a clue.
This is a public safety. There is an outbreak of violent behavior in the area. Stay indoors and lock your doors and windows. Do not approach or attempt to
Break it down. Get out now!
What the hell are you doing?
One here.